community. Every day of the week, we discuss all things to do with the modern market, that is the crypto market, the NFT market, and how to make an ultra humongous amount of money on the internet. I'm your host, Bichek. I'm joined by my legendary co-hosts, Sammy and Legendary. And we're going to get into everything that's been happening on the pretty crazy weekend in the crypto markets over the weekend. Big real world news taking place, and this we will discuss all of it. We'll get into all of it. We'll look at some of the important tweets from the past 48 hours, try to make sense of what's going on. Are we okay? Are we not okay? We don't know for sure, and that is one of the points to make at the top of the show. This show is not financial advice. We don't know anything for certain. This is just our opinions, so please do exercise your own judgment and proceed with caution in what is a risky market. With that out of the way, Legendary, it is Monday. It is the 15th of April. Pretty crazy weekend. How are you doing? How are you feeling?
GM, pretty crazy weekend indeed. And on top of all the turbulences in the market, I also started to be worried about my job on the modern market, because I saw that Oxy shared the snapshot, pin it on top, which is something that I typically do, but he was just faster than me. So it feels like not only is the market coming from my portfolio, but Oxy is also coming from my job on the show.
Well, maybe is that a good thing? You didn't have to you had to do one less thing. That's pretty helpful.
Yeah, that's the positive way to look at it, but there's also like a fearful way to look at it.
This is the bearish perspective that has overtaken you over the weekend. Sammy, how have you felt over the weekend, coming out of it a little bit today? Thoughts on just the weekend that we've had?
Well, just on the point that Legendary just made, I think you introduced me first as a co-host as well, so he's been bumped to second co-host, which is insane.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's been an eventful weekend. Yeah, I'm assuming we'll get into it, but I've just been playing around with nodes, doing some farming, just staying in my lane.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I mean, one of the observations that I thought of the other day, and this was before all of the geopolitical turmoil in the last few days, was that like our Discord, for example, the group of people, and you know how, Sammy, we did our like London modern market meetup as well. Like the group of people who we've kind of congregated around, like no one seemed particularly stressed. Like even over the weekend, there were no messages that were like, guys, what's going on? Like, are we okay? Are we not okay? And similarly on the Thursday, obviously this is before the geopolitical stuff, but in general, pretty level-headed, reasonable group of people, I think. Have you considered that, Legendary, at all? Like, do you think that's because there isn't really that much reason to be stressed, or are we just blindly naive thinking it's all going to be okay?
I'm not stressed. I mean, I've been through the COVID dump, which was significantly worse than what we're seeing right now. We've been through Russia invading the Ukraine. Obviously, this is all not talking from a humanitarian perspective, but just from a purely market view, right? This is important for me to stress.
Sure.
I'm not really worried about that situation. If anything, it shows you how strong crypto is, that despite this happening, ETH is holding well above 3K. BTC is around that 64 to 65, 66K-ish range. Yes, we did go lower, but we also did bounce back from that pretty quickly.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, that's probably the general sentiment as well. I think, I mean, typically we're not a political show as such. It might be worth touching on some of the details just to so people can hear the different interpretations of why, even, for example, like because it factors into our risk factors, right? What I mean, one thing before we get into the actual headlines themselves, for example, obviously I looked at the situation and thought it was okay, which is why I'm in Dubai right now. And Legendary, you made the personal decision that you thought you were going to miss out. So even from that perspective, it might be interesting to hear. So Legendary, maybe to you first, because you were scheduled to come to Dubai. You kind of opted out. What was your thinking there?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'm not concerned for anyone's safety in Dubai. I do think that this is a safe space to be. To me, the only like actual risk was if things escalate, that you might end up being stuck in Dubai. I know you're gonna stay for 2 weeks. I had planned a 1 week stay. I do have a pretty tight schedule after Dubai. So to me, it was like, I just don't want to take, even if it's like a 2 or 3% chance that I might be stuck for a couple weeks or 1 week longer. I was like, I'm not going to play the odds of that. Plus, typically, I just know myself. Like when something like this happens, I am all over the news cycle. And I was like honest to myself that if I would be in Dubai, all I would do is read the news and read live tickers and the updates. And that's just not an enjoyable state for me to spend the week. So I was like, also from a mental health perspective, it's better for me to just, stay a bit away from that. But I wouldn't have like a security concern for you or for the people being there.
Yeah, I thought that was a really interesting point when you told me that you were deciding against it. I was like, yeah, completely fair enough. As you said, it's like a completely personal decision. It's not that I am, and in a similar way, it's not that I'm blind to the stuff. It's not like I'm turning my head away from it all. But I guess for whatever reason, I wouldn't be doing what you just said, what you thought that you would be doing, because I'm going to be here, and it's just not in my nature to be constantly updating that type of stuff. Maybe because I've checked out so much from mainstream media in general. But I don't know. I think it's just an interesting difference in perspective. Thought it'd be interesting to bring that up so people could hear even just our differing assessments of the situation. I guess the risk assessment that I did in my mind, right or wrong, I'm just going to share it and people can decide for themselves, was that I thought of it like I thought it was I thought it was unlikely to escalate. That's just the assessment that I made based on the information that I had. And then I thought, even if it did escalate, I thought this region was basically unaffected, in the same way, for example, that when the Ukraine and Russia started the conflict with each other, a neighboring country like Poland is like nearby, concerned, definitely like on edge, but not really affected. So that was my thinking. I appreciate there's like this difference in like the closing of the airspace, which is an additional layer on top of it. And maybe that's right, maybe it's wrong. Just thought it'd be interesting for people to share. Legendary, any reflections on that before we get into the show?
Nothing of substance to add to that. So let's just get into the news and into the state of the market.
What's this about, Sammy? I think B-Check is just there for 2 in the YouTube comments.
Yeah, there's a guy that said you're there for 10 weeks. So
right.
Just clarifying that. I know you've got your penthouse apartment, but yeah, I think it's 2 weeks, not 10.
Okay, yeah. Just 2 weeks, not 10. God, if it was 10, that'd be kind of nice. Okay. Let's get into the news. As we said, as always, the news comes from the snapshot, which is pinned up top by Oxy, not by Legendary. If you do find it bringing you some value today, please do give it a like. So let's get into it. Starting with some price action. We've got Bitcoin at 66.3K. That's up 3%. ETH at 3.2, up 5%. Solana at $155, up 7%. Headlines. Crypto bounces back after weekend sell-off on the Iran-Israel tension. Bitcoin at 66, ETH at 3.2, Solana at 155. Big news coming out of the East. Hong Kong clears Bitcoin spot ETF application. We're going to touch on that. The Hong Kong Securities and Futures Commission approved on Monday applications from leading financial institutions, including China Asset Management, Bosera Capital, and Hashkey Capital, for the launch of Bitcoin and Ethereum spot ETFs. I thought that was pretty interesting. The approval comes just days before the long-awaited Bitcoin halving event and adds optimism to the cryptocurrency market. We'll talk about that a little bit more in just a bit. And finally, Bitcoin ordinals still just absolutely rock solid despite all of the carnage around the rest of the market. Node monks and puppets strong at 0.46 and 0.48 BTC respectively. And Bitcoin wizards, a 1.3K collection, rip up to 0.28. Bitcoin, they've been around for a while, and it seems to be on the back of this wizard token absolutely ripping over the last couple of days. So we'll get into all of those details in just a little bit. Some top sales from around the space. Xcopy run continues. The damage sells for 27 ETH. CryptoPunk Wild White Hair sells for 45.95 ETH. Some floor prices from around the space. CryptoPunks are at 41 ETH now. Bored Apes struggling. Bored Apes down 7% at 10.2 ETH. Mutants down 4% at 1.8. DeGods at 1.3, down a few percent. Captains up 1% at 3.3. Everything else is down. Azuki's at 4. Penguin's down 6% at 10.3. Mad Lad's down a few percent at 140. Nouns winning bid is at 7.6 ETH. Legendary. Red across the board there. Before we get into the main headlines and the kind of geopolitical tension and Bitcoin strength and the Hong Kong ETF, any numbers catching your attention before we get there?
Probably the Apes floor, as you said, floor at 10.2 ETH, and the top offer being 10.1 ETH, so both still above 10 ETH, but barely so. And a lot of people commenting on the timeline that they're waiting to see if it will dip below 10 ETH over the next couple of days.
What do you think here, Legendary? Like, it's definitely been noted that, like, what's the bottom on a Bored Ape Yacht Club premium asset these days? Like, when is the bid going to come in, if at all? People have started to talk about the single digit, like when it dips below 10. Does this become a buy at any point? Not specifically for you, but well, for you, for anyone. Can you see it there anymore?
Not in the current state of the market, to be honest. I would say there's much better things to do with that ETH from a return on investment perspective. I've also seen, because I'm on Liquidium lending against ordinals, I've seen 12-fold the Yuga Labs ordinals show up on the basically lending side of things, and they have one of the worst loan to value ratios. So basically, nobody's willing to take a risk to give BTC out against them. The floor of them is currently at 0.39 Bitcoin, and the best offer stands at 0.11 Bitcoin, so the 29% loan to value ratio. If you compare that to something like the Bitcoin puppets, who despite their massive pump in the floor price of 0.46 BTC, top offer sits at a 64% LTV, so at 0.3 BTC. So even on that side of things, nobody's willing to offer you not even close to 50% loan to value ratio on a 12-fold.
Gosh, that is pretty interesting. Sammy, can you see any reason for anything in the Yuga ecosystem to really turn at the moment? Like, are there any bullish indicators for the moment?
Well, I mean, even the punks are down, but I think that within the Yuga ecosystem is probably the main one that I'd be focusing on, just because they're pure standalone provenance. But I think the observation that I make on the price action from ETH and Bitcoin, I think it's interesting to look at the Bitcoin puppets and finding out that I think we've seen Lasser Jets on the Mintify heat map for probably about a week now. It's been on a bit of a run. And that is apparently the same artist as the Bitcoin puppets. And there's rumors that they'll be bridged to Bitcoin at some point. So I think they're almost at a 1 ETH floor now. So it's amazing how sentiment of a project can kind of pull up the valuations of the projects on other chains as well. And I think that's probably happening with Yuga, with Bitcoin and ETH as well, with the Bored Apes and the 12-fold. But it's just interesting to see that. And then something else I've been looking at is, if we go back to the Mintify heat map, I think the World Wide Web land has had a bit of a run. And I think that off the success of Pixels, I think they've got probably about 800,000 users at the moment, like frequent users. I think people are looking for the next play. So I think World Wide Web land have run a little bit. You've got Spellborn, Genesis. So everyone's looking at those as potential avenues to get bigger exposure. I think the Pixels farmlands at like 1.7, 1.8 ETH. World Wide Web lands at about 0.3. Similar with the Spellborn Genesis land as well.
Interesting.
So I think there's a couple of Go on.
There are still some really expensive assets out there, aren't there? Really, like if you think about it, this Lasser Jet one is really interesting. If you think about it, there's probably no hotter artist right now than the Bitcoin puppet artist, right? Like there can't be. Like the puppets have completely captured all mindshare, both from the ordinal perspective in their kind of attempt to surpass the node monks, and how they kind of been trolling them and getting those floor prices closer. But then the rune pups as well, and then so the token, which has kind of come off the back of those, which has been so very valuable in comparison to all, and it's kind of been the chosen one already out of all of these runes. Sorry, go on, Sammy.
it does make me think that, is this the changing of the guard? Because you've effectively got runes that were airdropped to puppets. You've now got that coming in. So if for instance, post-halving, in which I think is in just over 4 days, if those really pop off, all of a sudden you've got puppets that receive this airdrop, similar to what the Bored Apes did back in, I think it was 2022, maybe even earlier. I can't even remember what the date was, but I think that valuation, the value accrual to those original people that got in at whatever it was, I think it was like almost a free mint, or at least they were down at 0.03 Bitcoin for such a long period of time, that you've got this value driven through to them from a different, like, mimetic perspective, as opposed to, well, I think the vibes have changed, right? I think if you compare it to the Yuga ecosystem, it's gone from very much like an informal, like crypto-centric origins, that people just had a lot of money and they were just like getting into this, and it was just like we were Bored Apes. And now it's become a bit more of a corporate structure that it's kind of less in touch with its community. Whereas I think this is completely the opposite. It's kind of rallying behind an artist that everyone kind of resonates with, and they've had a lot of value that's driven to them. So it'll be interesting to see if it follows the same trajectory that Bored Apes did back 2-3 years ago, and whether there will be a changing of the guard.
Yeah, really, really interesting point, the kind of corporate aspect. One point I want to touch on before we go to, I see Oxy with his hand raised, Funky with his hand raised, want to hear from both of them and then get straight into the headlines. But this idea that the corporate thing is necessarily bad. The only thing I would push back on that, because I do think it has not turned out particularly well for the Bored Apes, and there has been a little bit of a disconnect between the new corporation and the group of holders. So I do think there's a disconnect there. However, one of the interesting things which I didn't expect to see was that there are these meme coins that are actually companies who like build stuff. So Bonk, for example, and some people may not even know this, it's a proper company and they've got like a strategy. They've got this bot, Bonk bot, which apparently is really, really good. Like, it's a great product. So it's almost like you can have a company, you try to meme it into people's consciousness for some reason, and then try to get people to use your product on the back of the meme, which is an interesting way around. Now, obviously, that's a different way around to the way that maybe it's worked out for Bored Apes, where it's like the corporation came after and the culture came first. Whereas some people might have the corporation in mind, and then it's part of the strategy to try to figure out how to meme it into existence first. Kind of maybe a little even bit like Pac-Moon. Legendary, it's super interesting. Wanted to just jump to you first to get your thoughts on that, and then we'll go to Funky and Oxy.
Yeah, very, very much agree with that. I do think that with my thesis of tokenizing attention and then seeing how you put that to use, it is a valuable playbook to go for a meme. I think it's also the easier playbook than like breaking out as a meme coin, establish yourself as something that can exist over cycles like Doge did. So it's just probably the easier playbook to follow, especially if you think it through from the perspective that you're building something on Base, you're building something on Blast, which are like temporarily hyped. And I don't know, like, if that Base hype will stay forever or not. I think we've seen L2s fade into the trending and hyped section of the timeline and then fade out of it. So if you are already on a trend and you're trying to build something that is attention driven, like a meme coin on a trending L2, you might as well go for that playbook and be like, yo, we capitalized that attention. Now, where can we best allocate that and try to turn it into an actual product / company?
Yeah, interesting stuff. Maybe a bit of a side tangent there that we've gone on, but I think that's an interesting conversation as we try to assess, because obviously people are looking always out for the next meme. How's it going to come about? And I just don't think it's necessarily completely absent of corporations. I don't think it has to be like that, which is interesting. Funky, your hand is raised. Welcome to the stage, my friend. What are your thoughts on this?
Jam, everyone. Hope everybody's having a great day. I'm just absolutely floored, no pun intended, that Bored Ape Yacht Club could be sub 10 ETH. I mean, when we think about even 2-3 years ago, these were sort of seen as if punks were the number one, they were like the 1A. And I just can't believe how far they've fallen. And I think this speaks a lot to trying to create after the fact a company around this kind of something that was a cultural zeitgeist back in 2021. I mean, Steph Curry, for goodness sake, bought a friggin', ape. And so it's amazing to see how difficult it is to take something that's a cultural item and turn it into a product after the fact. And it's even now, I think, starting to affect, like, we've seen a couple of the sales of punks go below 40. And I just think that I think punks long term are going to be fine, but it's just absolutely amazing to me. Like, and it just shows how impermanent things are in Web3 in general, and how quickly things go out of style. So it's just I never thought I'd see this day, and we're having this conversation right now.
Yeah, very, very hard to maintain culture. I've likened it to, you mentioned Steph Curry as a sports person. I've likened it to sports teams as well. Like, if you think about it, it's very, very hard to have, you have like one generation of a bunch of good players in your team. And then how do you refresh when one person retires, one person leaves to go to another team, and then there's just one of them? Like, how do you put the next people around them? But it's the same. Like, when you have certain significant holders who leave a community who might have been very influential, like, how do you replenish? How do you keep it going? How do you build the next generation? So I definitely liken it to sports in that way. Oxy, your hand is raised. Welcome to the stage, my friend. What is your thoughts either on the Bored Ape decline or kind of general decline, actually, for ETH NFTs?
Yeah, GM guys. First, just an observation. I think it's interesting that Legendary is threatened by me posting the tweet up top, and then immediately goes to fund my bags as soon as he gets asked.
Yeah.
So just interesting, I don't know if it felt a little personal to me, but I guess to that point though, I mean, it really comes down to complacency. I kind of feel like there's just seems to be no drive to maintain attention whatsoever. And like, obviously the memeability of like something like a Yuga or Bored Ape is just like difficult at this point, being so established. Like, you're not going to change the entire brand to a meme just to like get attention for a couple of weeks, right? Like, that's just not going to happen. But there's just been no additional outside of that to maintain that attention, to be able to like stay in this kind of mainstream. Like, the only time that I hear about Yuga assets is a show, and it's talking about how bad they're doing. Like, I don't see them on the timeline. I don't hear about them in any DMs or Discord chats or anything. It's just like fading from existence, kind of. So I don't know, frustrating.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Very, very difficult to turn the tide, I guess, when you can feel it moving away from you. So we'll have to see how they do. I know they're building a whole bunch of games, loads and loads of stuff going on the gaming side, at least. It just needs to hit. So we'll see. We'll see how they do. Let's get into kind of the main topic of today's discussion, though, the few headlines, particularly around the geopolitical conflict between Israel and Iran, how it affected the markets over the weekend. Legendary made a good point towards the start of the show. We're not geopolitical experts in any way. We're definitely not humanitarian experts in any way. Obviously, conflict is difficult for both sides. We're not getting into the kind of details and the rights and wrongs of it. We're mostly just going to analyze it from a market perspective. So that's just the disclaimer before we get into it. Legendary, you were more online than me when this was happening, because I was getting ready to travel. Do you want to set up like how things happened from your perspective, your interpretations of it, how the market moved, and just any of your thoughts, and then I'll come in after you, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. It was actually very similar setup to the Ukraine invasion, in the sense of you had the news breaking that Iran has started an airstrike against Israel. And the important thing to note about that is that obviously Iran is not bordering to Israel. So it took those missiles quite a while to reach Israel, and it wasn't sure what the impact of those would be. So would they hit a lot of civilian targets, military targets? Would the Iron Dome plus the joint Israeli defenses, together with the French, Jordania, as well as the UK defense forces, be able to prevent the worst of that airstrike? So that already caused massive anxiety. Then markets have dipped pretty violently and pretty fast. Obviously, there's been a lot of liquidations. You've seen ETH falling under the 3K mark. You've seen BTC tumbling down quite significantly, but it all had been like the morning after had been pretty much not as violent to look at the charts from the BTC and ETH perspective, because at that time, BTC and ETH were only down like 5-6-ish%, whereas obviously meme coins and altcoins have taken a way harder hit, and that was followed by already a bit of a downward action the day before, which certainly has increased the number of liquidations that we've seen, because we haven't been in an upward but in a downward momentum. And then over the weekend, the typical basically fear and anxious trading and trading on rumors has unfolded. There's been a moment over the weekend where BTC did recover to around like 65.5, 0.7K. And suddenly a rumor was spread on X that Israel will retaliate within the next 24 to 48 hours. And immediately after that went viral. BTC dumped within 2 or 3 minutes. I was watching the chart because I was farming perps on Blast. So I was part of that action, so to speak. BTC had tumbled to 62K. Then it turned out, no, that's not true. There's been a phone call by Netanyahu with Biden. He said he's not going to retaliate immediately. They're like still strategizing on what their action or response will be. And within 5 minutes, basically, that dump was already back up and pumped. And that story is more to illustrate that in those kind of situations, markets obviously are very, very anxious, react to news, react to rumors, especially in our small like bubble of crypto, extremely quickly. And the risk there is, if you still have obviously leveraged positions, that a rumor like that can completely wipe you out. And I do prefer in an environment like this to not be risk on in terms of not having like leveraged longs or shorts open on anything. If I want to short along something, I do like in a pretty quick manner. Like I tried to time that short. It was basically open for 2 minutes and then I closed it and took the profit on that. But it's probably not to be advised to have that open for a longer period of time. I think also from the timeline, a couple of things I took notice of is that many people were playing around, or not many, but certain people were playing around with leverage and not really understanding what was going on. There was this one guy who apparently or allegedly had all his, or major part of his net worth in like 3 or 4x leverage long on Pepe, got wiped out, had like this massive wall of text about how everything is ruined, etc., 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 and basically said only option left is to commit suicide. And then he suddenly got 183K back into his Binance account, because if you get liquidated, obviously you get some of the money back. It's not that everything is gone typically. So it did show that some people were trading with leverage. If that wasn't a troll post, which obviously is hard to assess from the outside, do not fully understand what's going on. And I feel like now that we have a bit more like clarity for the moment of the situation, the market managed to calm down a bit. Certainly the ETF news out of Hong Kong was helpful with that. But as it stands, Israel is still strategizing on what their response will be. The most up-to-date thing that they said is that the response will not be words, there will be actions. They didn't go into any details on that. And from a US standpoint, the President Biden said that in case that Israel is to attack Iran, they won't support them in an offensive against Iran, so they would be on their own.
Yeah. Okay. Very, very helpful summary. As you said, on the geopolitical side, Israel's kind of thinking of its response. Obviously, from Iran's perspective, they think they're hitting back for a previous attack on their consulate in Syria, I think a week or two before. But I saw someone who I follow quite closely on Twitter and on the All In podcast is David Sachs, and he kind of framed it like that. He framed it as Israel attacked Syria. Israel attacked Iran. Iran then retaliated, but then you get this thing in the comments where it's like, well, what about before that? What about before that? What about before that? So we appreciate that these things are very, very historical, long-standing conflicts. We're not suggesting that, you know, one thing is the starting point. These things are exceptionally complicated. So there's obviously a chain of events where things are deeply connected to some degree. So that's the geopolitical side of things. On the market side of things, that was an excellent kind of summary of how things played out. Sammy, in respect of the kind of leverage conversation, how did you feel during those moments? Did you observe anything interesting? What were your thoughts as those things were playing out?
Yeah, I mean, I was playing around with perp dexes as well on the weekend, which probably wasn't the smartest thing, but there's a lot of volatility in the market. So typically, if this kind of stuff happens, I'd switch to spot and probably stay out, unless, of course, you have like a severe dip, in which case it's probably a prime time to put a little bit of leverage on, or maybe just at least spot going the other way. I think that, I mean, yeah, like Legendary summarized it very well. I think the market side of things, it's pretty terrible. It's very, very hard to work out what's going to happen next. I know that the US market's open in about 2 hours. So it'll be interesting to see what the price action is coming into that, whether there'll be outflows from the ETF and therefore a price hit to Bitcoin. But I think the news in Hong Kong could be a favorable thing. So it's very hard to judge which way it's going to go. So I'm sat partly in stables, partly in crypto, but probably blue chip crypto assets, because I think there'll be a lot of volatility in the market for those meme coins and things. So,
okay.
Yeah,
that's really interesting. You mentioned like the kind of portfolio structure of where you are now. And remember, we're approaching this from a market perspective. I saw lots of people joking that they were going to buy or having the potential to buy the dip, but they were like, with what? What are you going to buy the dip with when we thought we were just going to go up only and we're fully allocated already? So I thought what would be helpful here is just to think about like allocations for a second, get your perspectives. I found a really interesting, and that's before we're going to get on to the Hong Kong ETF and the other news in just a bit. But I thought this post by Santiago Santos is really good. He's an investor who I have started to listen to quite a lot. He's on the Empire podcast. This is what he shared over the weekend. Just in terms of like, look, whatever is happening is happening. How do we react to it? How do we kind of think about positioning moving forward? He said this, would love to hear your thoughts. Many have asked what's on my shopping list and how I'm reacting to recent events. Thesis continues to be simple this cycle. Solana is the most retail friendly chain. Yes, you know, there's problems with that, but that's the simple thesis. Therefore, memes will do well on Solana. Continue to believe we're in a bull market. Systematically, where I see big drops and forced sellers, I draw from cash to add positions I like. Have learned to always have stables to buy the dip. So that's the question on stables. And he actually goes on to explain his proportions. And I would love to hear your thoughts on that. He said, also, I have zero leverage, which is something you've just been speaking about the importance of in very volatile moments like this. I'm buying with long-term targets in mind for this cycle. Solana 800 to 1,000, WIF as the dominant SOL meme converging on SHIB valuation, and feel good about the remainder of 2024, unclear about 2025. Me and Legendary have definitely spoken about that as well. Like, you know, feeling quite good about this year. Beyond that, who knows at the moment. He goes on to actually, when someone asked, like, how do you manage your cash position? Because that's the thing, right? Everyone's saying, oh, buy the dip. And everyone's like, well, with what? We were already bullish, already max bullish. How are we supposed to have anything else? So someone actually asked, how do you manage your cash position? Do you have a minimum and maximum cash balance or share of the portfolio? What if that leads you to sell assets for cash before they reach the price potential? And he said this, varies between 5 to 20% of the liquid portfolio. I'm not looking to reach max price potential. It's impossible to time that. I'm systematically sizing down a position if it becomes over 20% of the portfolio, or if it's over 10x, or if it's done more than a 10x and over a $1 billion FDV, as probabilistically doing another 10x on that position is lower than a seed round of 20 million FDV, but that's just his strategy. So a bunch of interesting ideas there. Legendary, I guess the thing that brought us to this was this conversation about stables, buying the dip when you get the opportunity versus being all in and just chilling because you're bullish for the rest of the year. How are you approaching that? How are you thinking about that distinction between having some stables to buy the dip versus just allocating and relaxing?
Super important question. Also, like a super individual answer to that.
Yes.
I think it depends on what you want to do with your stable stack. If your stable stack is really, I took profits and these profits will be moved to fiat eventually, and you probably should refrain from speculating with them, because for all we know, you think you buy the dip and then shit actually hits the fan because it's a massive liquidation cascade, and a big lender is going bankrupt, and then we have a little market crisis that goes on for longer, and suddenly your dip buying doesn't look as good, and you're down on that as well. You start to panic, you sell it, and then the market pumps again, and you manage to cut down your stable stack by 40% because you mistraded and panicked. So it depends what you want to do with your stable stack. If your stable stack is still part of your liquid portfolio and it's just sitting there on the sidelines chilling and maybe farming a 15% APY on wherever you want to put it, and then you're like, but it's essentially capital that's ready to deploy and speculate, so it's like still in the game, then that's a fair strategy. And then yes, do buy the dip. If your stable stack is part of taking profits and moving that out of fiat, then probably be more conservative if you want to re-enter the game with that stable stack. Personally, I have both. I have stables on different wallets, obviously, and some of those wallets are like cold wallets that are me taking profit this cycle as opposed to last cycle, and some are working capital in a sense that just wait to do things that I deem to be smart.
Interesting.
Like buying a dip.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. Sammy, anything different from what Legendary has just said?
Yeah, I mean, with risk management, it comes down to, I guess you got two pools of cash. You got the strategic asset allocation, and you got tactical asset allocation. One is probably for more longer term timeframes where you just want to be allocated based on your own personal circumstances. So if you look at, I compare it to like retirement pension funds and things like that. If you're closer to retirement, you're probably going to have a less risky asset pool. But if you're young, you're probably going to be more heavily weighted in equities as opposed to bonds, because you've got that longer term before you need those funds. So I think it just completely depends on your own personal circumstances. I think with crypto, a lot of people here are high risk. They probably don't adhere to the typical traditional finance allocation strategies. But I think if you have a rough weighting about what you intend to use those funds for in the not too distant future, you can probably allocate accordingly. Like if you've got rent to pay, obviously have some stables for that, or whatever, convert it to fiat, but just make sure you have sufficient runway that if shit does hit the fan, then you've got enough to survive on, at least in the short to medium term. And then hopefully in the long term, the market will heal and it will kind of trend back upwards.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair stuff. Funky, your hand is raised. Final take on this situation, on maybe the geopolitical stuff / the allocation game that you're playing between stables and crypto. What are your thoughts before we hit the other headlines?
Yeah, a lot of great points already made, so I won't belabor some of them. I will say it was very difficult because part of this is my third time on the merry-go-round. I promised myself when I hit certain price targets to peel some off, set it in stables, put those stables to work in DeFi. And it was really tough to not touch that stack over the weekend, because the dip comes and you see it and you know, oh, maybe I'm under allocated to X, Y, or Z thing. But I just really stuck to my guns. I didn't touch the stables and I just let them do their thing. And I feel like that's probably the best way forward. Again, this is just my particular risk profile at this point, and knowing that I need to be better about taking profits now that this is the third time around, and maybe not redeploying those immediately just when we see any given dip, because I did that all the time in the last run.
Nice. That's really helpful to have that kind of third cycler perspective, Funky. So appreciate that take. Let's keep it moving. Let's hit one of the next headlines. We spoke about actually one final point. Let's just move on. We spoke about the Hong Kong ETF as being quite significant. We had a little article. Where is it? Can I find it? I cannot currently find it. Here we go. Hong Kong approving the first batch of spot Bitcoin Ether ETFs, which has kind of come out of the blue for me, if I'm being completely honest. We were so obsessed with the SEC battle and wondering what they're going to approve and how these things are going to work. And it seems like Hong Kong just come out of left field and just approved everything. So just for some headline details for you, Hong Kong have approved several spot Bitcoin ETFs and spot Ether ETFs managed by China Asset Management, Harvest Global, and a couple of other people. The asset managers did not disclose the timeline of the launch. So Hong Kong have approved the application of several ETFs, blah, 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 a bunch of other information. Harvest Global Investments, 2 spot crypto ETFs have also received in principle approval from the SFC. It added that the 2 ETFs will be issued in collaboration with OSL, which could effectively address issues such as excessively high margin requirements. Becerra and Hashkey told the block that the pair will work together to launch a spot Bitcoin ETF. This article seems to be repeating itself many, many times. Basically, the headline is that they have been approved. Legendary, you kind of alluded to this a couple of times as we were speaking about the broader kind of sell-off. What significance do you attach to this? And I'm just going to bring up another tweet because I was going to mention him before. GCR came back over the weekend, a legendary crypto trader, to say, first, if you've been sidelined, I believe this is a good opportunity to scale into high conviction tokens. He said, I was enjoying retirement from social media, but don't want to see my brothers get shaken out. But in addition to that, what a tweet that Sammy reposted was, and I saw a few people repost this, was that he said some time ago, I believe China and Asia in general will fuel the next run. It will take quite some time to melt Western cynicism towards this space, but the East is ascending and yearning to flex. You should be hanging out in WeChat. Many future pumps will be on coins. None of your circle. No. What's your reflection on the Hong Kong ETF news and maybe connecting it to this GCR stuff to the extent that you think that is a correct connection?
And there's 2 points that I haven't seen being talked about on the timeline that I think are very, very relevant when it comes to the Hong Kong ETFs. Point number 1 is the redemption model for both the BTC and the ETH ETFs, where in the US with the BTC ETF, the redemption is in cash, which means if you want your assets out, you get dollars, you don't get BTC. In Hong Kong, issuers are allowed to choose. You can do both in cash and in kind redemption, which is pretty cool. That means that you can actually get your hands on the underlying, on the BTC or on the ETH, which is in the ETF. That is a major, major point. And also seeing how fast Hong Kong is moving along with their regulatory framework. It was in December that they issued a joint circular on intermediaries' virtual asset related activities, which is a regulatory framework and guideline on what issuers have to keep in mind and have to respect if they want to do things with cryptocurrencies, to put it simply, including ETFs. And that has set a very clear framework for issuing the spot ETFs for both ETH and BTC. And obviously, you don't have that regulatory clarity in the US, where we are seeing this live with the example of BTC being live as an ETF and ETH now still being questioned. Is it a security? Isn't it a security? Are we going to have an ETF in May? Will it be postponed? Which seems to be the case, which seems to be the likely case right now. And Hong Kong did take a very strong contrasting step to that by A, having both redemption models, and B, having a very, very strong regulatory and very clear regulatory framework. I think that, like, from our European/American perspective, we are still very much focused on the American market and very much focused on what the US is doing. And it is, like, personally, I don't like it. I don't like it from the perspective that everything is depending on the US, but it would be ignorant to ignore it, because it is what matters. And if the sentiment in the States on something is terrible and we see regulatory concerns from the States, it will affect the market more. If, I don't know, Hong Kong says we are banning BTC, obviously it will have an impact on the market too, but still very, very US centric. But I do think with the ETH spot ETF in particular, which is internationally quite without competition. Of course, there's smaller countries who do have spot ETFs. So I think want to have spot ETFs on ETH, but they don't really matter. But Hong Kong, after all, is an international place to do finance at a large scale. So I do think that they could potentially get a lot of attention. And I do agree with GCR's perspective of having to have a look at what Asia is doing and it becoming impossible to ignore over the next couple of years. So I do think that we will shift away from this US-centric model of looking at things.
Yeah, it's really interesting as well. I think about it. I mean, two things I would say on the back of that, and then want to hear Sammy's thoughts, is that I kind of have noticed it even with NFT projects. Like, despite the fact we are in, allegedly in this kind of global marketplace, you notice that the things which get most attention, and maybe this is just a completely natural thing, right? Like if you're US based, you just happen to get more US attention, and US attention is worth more and goes further than other people's attention. But what I have noticed as well is that coming out of the East, in particular, Southeast Asia, East Asia, there's just great stuff going on. Like people are really crushing it, and the two communities don't really mix. Like I was talking about meme land the other day, and I'm not even an expert on meme land by any means, but I was talking to someone who's from the West Coast, and they were like, "Oh, do you even know anyone in meme land?" Like kind of fudding it a little bit. And it's just like, no, they're just not from where you are. There's like meme land is so unbelievably strong in that particular region of the world, and I think the region is actually more important than people think. And then my second point is it just makes me think of the Ray Dalio the thing where it's like the rise and fall of empires, the rise and fall of money, and it feels like we're in some type of stage where the US is struggling more, and that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a better option at this point, because I still think there's huge benefits there's huge pockets of strength in the US economy, which will continue to grow. But it does make me wonder whether, particularly in crypto, how they're just things are getting blocked. I've noticed in the UK as well recently, we're getting blocked from being able to participate in things. And there's a whole region out there, Singapore, Hong Kong, all of these places, Southeast Asia, who are participating. They are playing the game. They're innovating. Some of it's risky, some of it's not, but they're playing the game. And it feels like we're not always in the mix. Sammy, I think you wanted to share something to do with Mockaverse, which maybe speaks to this potentially, or what are your thoughts here before we move on?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think it's just clearly better regulate from a regulatory perspective, which just enables them to get a lot more progression in how they're performing. I think you got the likes of Mockaverse, you've got Azuki, you've got Memeland, you've got all these projects that have really strong Asian communities, partly because of the anime theme, but also just because they can actually meet up over there, and there's a lot more promise about what they can get involved with. I do think, though, that the UK's released exchange traded notes for ETH, or at least applications for that now. But that is limited to professional investors, so retail can't access that.
Yeah.
And I think that does prohibit how we, as like individuals, then participate in the market. I think it's a lot easier in those Eastern countries. Whether that will change over time, it has to. Otherwise, unfortunately, that is the way that things will go. It will progress a lot quicker, and I think we'll see a lot more developments over that way. But I remember, I think it was about 18 months ago, we saw NFT projects specifically look to expand in that region because they saw that as a better untapped market.
Well, don't you remember Luca did a whole Pudgy Penguins tour of the region, specifically went off traveling to be at all the places, meet all the people there, because he saw value in the area. So I completely agree with you there. And one of the most important things for me is like, just go and speak to people, speak to more people who are out there. DJ Soy, who's just commented on YouTube, I know, good friend of the show, good personal friend too, just commented, I confirm Hong Kong is bullish. I believe he's based out in Singapore, but like the more you speak to people out there, they really like you get a good handle on how things are going, and you contrast that with how things are going in your own regulatory frameworks, and just like, damn, you guys are actually able to participate and try to get things done.
I think even Singapore, I was over there for a month, Southeast Asia for a month in January. And just chatting to the average person on the street, they knew about crypto, they knew about NFTs, but you walk through London and you speak to those people and they're like, oh, is Bitcoin still a thing? What's an NFT? It's just almost a step backwards in society, not let alone the regulatory landscape. So
yeah, very, very interesting stuff. We got to get to the final headline of the day. We want to do a quick Web3 roundup from the snapshot to get you up to speed with everything else that's been happening in the past 24 hours too. And then we just got to touch on this ordinal strength and some of these runes going absolutely crazy. Can't go without getting you up to speed on that. So from the snapshot, stablecoin Titan Tether to launch a tokenization platform. That is pretty important. Probably going to be competing directly with BlackRock. Number 2, L2 for restaking Swell announced it is delegating up to $500 million of restaked ETH to Near protocol. As we already mentioned, both Bored Apes and Pudgy Penguins are down 6%, approaching a 10 ETH floor. Watching closely to see if it goes beneath. Cyberkongs announces a pre-runes collection called Prometheans. Maybe this will be the new trend. Instead of launching an ordinal collection, you just go for the runes directly now. Some more news. AI Wayfinder demonstrates first swap, send, bridge, and staking using AI. That's a pretty cool video. I'd recommend you check that out. Next, the Doom DAO announces 2 Xcopy acquisitions, Blood Bubble and The Damage. Xcopy has been just going completely nuts over the last couple of weeks. And interestingly, real estate mogul Grant Cardone announces selling some real estate for Bitcoin. We've had that conversation a couple of times on the show where we've been wondering, is Bitcoin necessarily in competition with other currency, or is the conversation much bigger? And is Bitcoin in competition with other traditional asset classes where that capital might flow from? Andrew Kang, significant investor, was alluding to that happening right here, right now. The flow of wealth from a $280 trillion asset to a $1.3 trillion asset is happening before your eyes. Interesting perspectives there. We don't have much longer left today, so I just want to update you on the ordinals situation and the rune situation. So I'm just going to share the screen, get people up to date on it. Despite the carnage across the weekend, ordinals are just strong as ever. Like runestones are at 0.08 Bitcoin, rune pups are still at 0.15, Bitcoin pub is at 0.64, node monks at 0.48, quantum cats have seen a big run up to 0.37. Real strength. Bitcoin wizards, as I mentioned at the top of the show, have had a huge run up to 0.28 Bitcoin. And if you look at their chart, I've got this up here, sharing it for the people watching in. Do I know how to share the chart on Magic Eden? Yes, maybe if I zoom out like this. So yeah, like these have been around for a while. And I think, although someone can correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, this is very much linked, and it's an odd way round that this is happening. I think people really like the token, which is this wizard token, which was like the most traded token, actually, more than pups. So what you can see here is that the amount of volume done maybe in the last 24 hours, pups was at 50 Bitcoin, wizard was at 75. So there's some connection between the collection itself and this token, which is just really increasing the activity across the board on ordinals. Still really hot. Any reflections from either of you on just the ordinals ecosystem? Is anything you're doing to double down on this now? Remember, it was only a week or so ago that both of you said this is the ecosystem you're going to have to miss out on because you're concentrating on too many other things. Has anything changed your mind here, Legendary? What are you thinking?
Yeah, I think I said last week that it was too much in the lending market and too little in the I own those ordinals market. And I did a little bit of shifting in my portfolio allocation on that over the weekend. And now the positive side that I try to look at in terms of not being in Dubai is that I'm at home for the Halvening and I'm at home for the runes and for the runes launch, so to say. So I do have more time to educate myself better on that and be able to trade that, because otherwise I certainly would have missed every trade around it.
Yeah, interesting stuff. Guys, that is the end of the show. Very interesting show. Thank you so much for joining me as co-host, as always, Legendary and Sammy. Thank you to our speakers, Funky and Oxy, and thank you to the listeners for joining us once again. and the YouTube comments. We were absolutely crazy, going crazy on YouTube today. We had Solas at the top. We had Tom, the Crazy Ape, Kashmir, Oxy, Pedito, Jose, Crypto Mocus, Jose again, DJ Toy. YouTube's going off, guys. So appreciate you all for participating. Hope you enjoyed the show again. We'll be back as always. We do this every single day, Monday to Friday, 7 a.m. Eastern Time, 12 p.m. GMT. We do it for 1 hour. We'll be back again tomorrow. We hope you have a wonderful day, and we will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.